Yeah.
Barely missed a tackle as well. He was... I mean, he still is a good player, isn't he? Is not what he was, but he's still a good player. When his career's over, again, I'll remember him as a second rower. David, what do you think of Gareth Ellis? One of the very best?
Definitely, massive fan of Gareth Ellis. Yeah, I think of him as a second rower. I know he played centre early in his career. He's got other skills as well. He could probably develop into various different roles, but I see him as a second rower. It's tough. I mean, he's so tough, that guy. Some of his defence is exceptional. He can carry it well, and he's got a good offloading game. He's a perfect modern second rower.
Yeah, so Carsten Brummer got in touch at Swiss_cowboy_78, our friend who was on the show last week. He said Jason, the king of Tonga Taumalolo, is the best second rower. I mean, he probably is if he played there, but he plays at loose forward, I'd say. So we'll talk about him when we talk about loose forwards. Carson also said Ollie Holmes is a funny one, and honourable mentions go to Sam Burgess and SBW, in brackets, not the Warrington one. Sam Burgess is another one of those players, isn't he?
Yes, I've actually got a list of second rowers with a question mark, because they're all players who have played second row, most of them internationally, yet you would see them as either a prop or a loose forward.
Do you think that's because to some extent we try and shoehorn good players into an international team without giving much regard for their positions?
Well, if you look at his...
Like, we try and play the best 13 players we have rather than the best player at each position.
I think there's an element of that, but when I think some players are so good that you need to find a way to get them in your side. They are better in their second best position than the best person in that position. And Sam Burgess, for me, is probably one of those players that I would have to find a way to make sure he's in my side.
I mean, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying...
I agree with you. That's what's happened. Yeah, definitely.
So therefore, there are a lot of players who you're like, well, is he or isn't he? And I guess like Morley, he played more times in one position for a club, yet for his country, he was the opposite.
Yeah, well, in Sam Burgess's case, internationally, test matches, he's played 6 in the front row, 8 in the second row, and started 8 from loose forward. So... that's kind of...
Yeah. He's that good, though, isn't he? He's that good. He's equally good in all of those positions. You could probably pick him full back and he'd be fantastic. He was that special. It's difficult to say. I'd say possibly he's a modern-day loose forward. Yeah. Possibly.
So we've got SBW. We've got 2 SBWs to talk about, guys. There's Sonny Bill Williams, but there's also... Super Benny Westwood, who does deserve an honourable mention, surely, in this category. Another one there who started as a centre at Wakefield, but played most of his career in the second row, even though he ended up playing a bit in the middle.
He's just a thug, though, isn't he?
He's a thug, but a thug who played a hell of a lot of games at a hell of a high level.
I thought he was a great player. I really rated him. I remember watching him when he was younger, and I remember saying to someone that he's international class, he play international, and I got laughed at. So I was quite happy when he did finally get some recognition. But no, I thought he was a fantastic player, Ben Westwood, and as you say, played a long time.
We have to acknowledge that he was a thug.
Well, it's a thuggish game, isn't it? Rugby League, you've got to be competitive. It's the way it is. I've seen worse.
Sarah, I think, does Alan say it best, what we've been trying to talk about all along through all of this?
Most of the best second rowers tend to have the talent and longevity to play elsewhere too. Peacock to prop, JT to 13, Bateman to centre, etc.
Yeah, I think maybe we will mention now that other players have played in other positions, but probably let's steer away from that side of the conversation a little bit until we get to David's list, obviously, at the end. Dr. Bob Phillips got in touch, and unsurprisingly to long-term listeners of the show, they'll know what Dr. Bob Phillips got in touch to say. He said, the most underrated second rower ever is Carl Ablett. Sorry, you said the most underrated second rower ever. Did I say overrated? This is the problem with Carl Ablett. I don't know which one he is.
No, you did say underrated, I think.
Did I? Under, over. It's Carl Ablett. He is the man that divides opinion. That should have been our poll, shouldn't it? I'm going to put that poll up.
I think it's a bit unfair. I think he's been a good pro, hasn't he? He's been a really good pro. He's been a good, solid player, and he's played well without being exceptional. And I think that's why he's sort of on the fringe of is he overrated or underrated. People can't decide. But I just think he's been a very good pro for a good Leeds team.
Yeah, if I personally didn't dislike the player that he was, probably because he was part of that successful Leeds team for so long, then he would have been on my list of honourable mentions. But because I think he's a bit I just don't like him as a player so much because I think he's been overrated by Leeds fans. But hey, I'm going to talk about some players that they'll think are overrated later on. But yeah, you're right. Sarah, what do you think? Carl Ablett, was he top end of the sort of next tier down or bottom end of the top tier?
Top of the bottom tier. Top of the next tier down, I think.
Another shock to people, Sarah, Tom Eckley. Who did Tom Eckley want to talk about?
Be criminal to go whole share and not mention the generation-defining second row in Big Matty Blythe. Honourable mention to the legend that is Big Benny Westwood, balance being a grub with significant amount of skill. Never forget his 4-try playoff performance against Leeds in 2013. Simon Griggs scored a worldie in that as well, actually. Does he count as a second rower? I loved that man. Criminally underrated on his day.
So a bit to get to there. The first thing to get to is Matty Blythe, I think, has offered his security services out to support NHS and frontline services, so in keeping people safe. So well done to Matty Blythe in that. We've talked about Ben Westwood. And Simon Griggs, talented player, played everywhere. Never had a position, did he? Does anyone...
No, but I would have always put him in the backs rather than the second row.
Yeah, I think he played more in the centres than he did in the second row, but I think he played more at loose forward than he did in the second row as well. So it's a... Do you know what? I replied to Tom and I said I think the reason why Simon Griggs was so underrated is because he never actually nailed down a true this is his best position. So because he never got to establish himself at that level.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Sarah.
No, I was going to say I think players who are your epitome of utility players often do miss out on a lot of the accolades.
Yeah.
That they should get.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the reasons why on SLP when we do our awards we have that like underrated player award, and it tends to go to a second rower like a lot of the time because of that sort of their ability to play in lots of positions and help your team out in a bind when there's injuries in games.
Yeah.
Matthew Speakman at MattSpeakman20 said, Bateman is incredible at his position, always seems to win contact and get a quick player of the ball and a great defender. And he mentions Menzies was always hunting for a try. That's two absolute top tier second rowers. John Bateman, one of the very best in the world right now. Steve Menzies, probably the best try scoring second row forward of the last generation.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with that.
Yeah, a great pro who kept going for a long time.
I mean, he was outstanding in the NRL, and he came over here what you thought was for a retirement package sort of thing, and he ended up playing 5 or 6 years over here and being really influential especially in that Catalan side when he first went over to them. I thought he was hugely influential there, but of course he had a couple of years at Bradford before that, and I think he's still the top try scoring forward in NRL history. So. Pretty impressive career. David, what do you make of John Bateman? Because, I could talk about John Bateman, but that would be boring for people to hear me talk about how much I love John Bateman again. What do you think of John Bateman?
I think he's fascinating. I mean, he doesn't look like a natural second rower, does he? But he's so strong. I can't get over how strong he is. His core. It must be his core because he's not like the typical big muscular guy, is he? But his core is so strong. People can't rotate him in the tackle. If you notice, he can get use his core to twist his body to land on his front, to play the ball quick. It fascinates me really. He picks his runs quite well. He's good in contact. He can slip through contact and make those breaks and turn them into tries quite often. And it hasn't surprised me really that he's suited the Aussie game. I think he surprised them because he didn't naturally look like as strong as he is, which is really deceiving. But no, I'm a big fan of his. Yeah,
he's gritty and relentless, and I think he's trying to become a more polished off the field person and not make big mess ups like he did when he got suspended internally at Wigan, and not make smaller mess ups like when he kind of maybe said the wrong thing at the wrong time about his contractual position last year, for example. But he's working on all of that stuff and doing well, but on the pitch he's still that same gritty, relentless, talented kid that you saw at Bradford at the start of the decade, and now he's evolved into the best player in his position in the world. Yeah,
and he's tough. I mean, a lot of the great forwards are just really tough because you've got to be. It's a horrible game at times. It's some of those hits. It's not just the eye-catching hits you see on TV, but some of the relentless, solid blows that your body takes. You've got to be tough to take that continually, and he does. You know, he'll take those hits, and he's a tough forward and a very good player.
Sarah, what did Andy Gilder have to say when he got in touch with us?
Oh, here he is. He said, can't split Adrian Morley and Ali Lawatiti in a Leeds shirt. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because Lawatiti, I feel, is actually another one of those players who just got on with the business and wasn't a flashy player at all, was he?
Do you think?
Yeah.
I think the opposite of Lawatiti. All I think of Lawatiti is ball in one hand looking for an offload.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's weird, that. Obviously, Morley, very early in his career, played in the back row, and we've covered that off. Morley we'll talk about when we talk about props in more detail, but he was a great second rower when he was a kid. Ali Lawatiti, how do you remember? Split the difference then, David. How do you remember Lawatiti?
I'm afraid I'd probably say, yeah, he's a very flamboyant player. Entertaining, really entertaining, great fun to watch. He used to frighten me when he got the ball if you were rooting for the home team and he was in the away team, because something out of nothing he could knock a couple of players off, twist his body and offer the ball up to another player close to the line. It didn't matter how many defenders were there, somehow he could get one hand free and get the ball out. So he was a very dangerous player, close to the line particularly, a great attacking player, fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's maybe someone you're getting mixed up with, Sarah, just because I always saw him with one hand out. I always thought there was a chance of him making a mistake, but also a big chance of him actually pulling something off.
Yeah, sorry, I think I've maybe misphrased what I meant then. I don't know quite how to... He's carry on anyway.
There was another player who was kind of like, at that time at Leeds, they had a player, right, who was like the anti-Lawatiti, who did all the really tough, hard work. Willie Poaching, he was like the opposite of Lawatiti.
Yeah,
so
I know Willie Poaching well.
Okay, fair enough then.
I think it's just been a difference of expression. Maybe.
Fair enough, yeah. Tom Regan, at Tom K. Regan, another Wigan fan, I can tell from this. He said, Simon Horton early on, then Hock, then Bateman. Hoffman was great for one season. And he said, I thought Westwood was really good in the early 2010s. Solomona always seemed to give Wigan problems. Ellis and Bulls-era Peacock were probably the best in Super League. And then Hindmarsh and Sonny Bill Williams at international level. So there's a couple of new names, well, there's more than a couple of new names thrown in there, but I think a couple of new names to focus on. David Solomona, God, that guy gave me heart attacks. Whatever shirt he was in, he was such a threat. He was the most skillful second rower in the Super League for a period, and he seemed to be fast even though he didn't look fast. He seemed to have great hands even though he looked like he could drop the ball at any time, and he had so much power as well for someone who just seemed to amble into tackles. He couldn't get put down. He terrified me. I don't know if you guys had the same experience of David Solomona, but he terrified me.
I can't really recall him. I've not really got any memory of him.
He scored a try for Wakefield late on in a game that stopped Wigan getting a chance of the playoffs in one of our bad seasons. Then he went to Bradford and scored a hat-trick against us, I think, in that game where we came back and beat him. He certainly scored a hat-trick against us in one game, but we managed to overcome it. And then went to Warrington, and every time I went to the Halliwell Jones, he seemed to